Hello and welcome. I'm your host Shipra, and you're listening to Digital Dilemmas Women at Work, a podcast where we dive deep into intersections of gender and digitalization of work. In today's episode, we'll explore the impact of new technologies on women's work in the fisheries sector. To help us unpack this, we are thrilled to be joined by Professor Nitya Rao, who has a significant contribution to understanding gender dimension of migration, education, and well-being, as well as the gendered impact of economic growth and intra-household resource allocation. Professor Nitya Rao is a professor of gender and development at University of East Anglia, author of more than 200 research papers. Welcome, Professor Nitya Rao.
Thank you so much, Shipra.
The first question that I would like to ask you is, so what drew you to study women's work in fisheries sector?
So, actually, I've been working more with women farmers, women engaged in forest produce, also home based women workers for many years. Since the 1980s, I started actually working with women BD workers in urban areas with SEVA, Self Employed Women's Association. So, actually, my involvement with the fisheries sector, or women's work in fisheries, came relatively later. In 2012, I was invited to a workshop to explore sort of the gender dynamics in the fisheries sector at the World Fish Center in Penang, Malaysia. And this is basically an international research organization. And they were just beginning to look at gender and social inclusion issues. So there had been some studies on women's work in fisheries sector prior to this, but not that many. I think it was more like academic research in India. Particularly, we have Kalpana Ram's work on Mukkavar women in Kanyakumari, or Holly Hapke's in Kerala. But I think there was some academic work, but not that much really attention in terms of policy and practice. So, as a result of this meeting in Penang, I think two things happened. The first was that we were asked, in partnership with World Fish, to organize a training program on researching gender for World Fish field staff from 5 countries: Philippines, Cambodia, Bangladesh, Zambia, and the Solomon Islands. And we helped them with research design, with asking the questions, also with data analysis. And that really got me quite interested into the kinds of insights that was emerging from this kind of research in terms of the constraints, in terms of the invisibility, a lot of issues, I think, which we have seen in the farming community and which also apply to the fisheries sector. But at the same time, I think this kind of joining up experience, it also got me interested to study women's work in fisheries. And we set up with colleagues from Cambodia, Thailand, and Sri Lanka a research project which was comparing sort of the issues of fisher folk, looking at what were the gendered aspects of it, also looking at mobility and how that worked, given that fishing actually is a mobile profession, right? So, fisher people, especially in marine areas, normally the fishermen are away from home for many days. So we don't call this migration, but this is part of their occupation. But still, women are contending with some of those same kinds of issues, male absence, of managing the home, of managing social reproduction, and so on, and looking at well being. So this led to a book which we published with Rutledge India in 2019. I think as a result of this, I was doing the work in India, in Tamil Nadu, in 2 districts, Kadalur and Kanyakumari. And while doing this work, I came into contact with many more researchers who were also working in Tamil Nadu on fisheries sector, but not many of them had a gender lens. So we decided to sort of combine together and do a project focusing on India itself and on fisher well-being. So I think now it's been like more than 10, 15 years that I've been working with women's work and fisheries.
I think if you could just explain a little more about how these roles are gendered in fisher folk communities, because I'm sure most of the audience are not aware as to how the work is divided between the genders.
There is a perception very much that men go to fish, which is true. They go out into the sea or whatever, they do the fishing activity, and that women basically they do selling or marketing or fish vending. So what has been well known and is more visible in our policy and practice discourse as women in the markets, head loading fish, selling door to door, and so on. But I think what I really found, which was very interesting, and I think which is totally invisible, that women are actually engaged in fisheries right from pre-harvest to post-harvest and social reproduction. So for instance, pre-harvest, they also help with mending and repairing nets, collecting bait. Like in Kanyakumari, we saw that they do hook and line fishing, for which on every hook there is a small fish which is put as a bait, and then the fishermen take this out. So all that job of putting the bait, collecting the bait, preparing the hooks. All this is done by women. Men, of course, go out on the boats for fishing, but there are certain types of fishing activity also that women do, like seaweed collection is mostly a women's task. It's up and coming enterprise in India. It has not been given that much of priority so far because we don't have that much seaweed consumption like in China or other places, Japan and so on. But in fact, the government of India has been very keen on export promotion. Like now they have given emphasis on even the seaweed export. This is very much a women's occupation. Similarly, oyster and shell collection, and also backwater and culture fisheries is something that women are involved with. Then there are cleaning activities like prawn cleaning, peeling, squid cleaning, fish cutting also, which is very interesting. It's an activity that women, very poor women, they sit in the fish markets and they don't have capital to buy the fish, but they actually, for the customers who buy the fish, then they just cut the fish and they get like 10 rupees per kg or whatever. Then there are, of course, processing activities like drying fish, smoking fish, fermenting fish. There is a whole set of transportation activities which women do, whether it is head loading, taking fish in small vans from the beach to the harbor or to the market, using larger vans or trucks to go to more distant markets, autos and cycles and so on. Then, of course, the better known and the more visible activity of marketing itself, which is street marketing, street vending, retail vending, door to door, and so on. And very important task which I want to mention is actually social reproduction, which is completely invisible, which is really when the men are away, as I said. So a lot of the management that needs to be done in terms of preparing for these fishing trips, like arranging for labor, maintaining accounts, organizing fuel and food for the next fishing trip. In Kanyakumari district, I found that men do these deep sea fishing, so they're away for 8-10 days at a stretch, even 15 days, and then they come home for 2-3 days. So basically, women do all this background work which is essential for a fishing trip. So I think a lot of this work is totally invisible. I did write a series of photo essays for the People's Archive of Rural India, PARI, on women cutting fish at the harbor. Once these women cut the fish for the customers, there is a lot of waste in terms of the heads, in terms of the fins, in terms of the skin. There are again women who collect all this waste and then it's all recycled and sent to fish meal industry and so on. But they are completely invisible. Then women drying fish, auctioning, these apart from social reproduction, also supporting activities like selling ice to these small fish vendors, or if they are sitting whole day in the market, bringing lunch, cook and selling lunch to the women working and so on. So we also prepared 3 short films which are also available on the Pari website. One was on a woman auctioneer, one was and the difficulties and challenges she encountered, but also the support she gave to other women workers. A second one was exactly on this, on the diversity of women's work, really giving visibility to all these kinds of activities that women are doing. And a third was, of course, on the impact of COVID-19 lockdowns on the lives of women who worked in the markets, their rising indebtedness, and how they actually managed this lack of transport becoming expensive, and so on. So, the lack of recognition, I think, of this diverse gender roles means that there is very little support, of course, for women in all these multiple roles. So, whether it is in terms of credit, whether it is in terms of capital, whether it is in terms of protective gear, like, seaweed, peeling prawns, this needs protective gear, whether it is in terms of storage facilities, like for women drying fish, or transportation facilities for women vending fish. Also, issues like food, water, toilets for women are totally neglected in this whole fisheries sector. No, there's absolutely no attention to this. Reasonably kind of wealthy fisher households in Chennai who had been migrant from Kadalur district, they own trawls, they are doing well, and so on. And therefore, because of economic mobility and social status, women don't directly engage in any of these fisheries work. But what was very interesting was actually their role in strengthening sort of social organization, kinship relations, family organization in order to expand the business. So we found that there is something which in Tamil they call as Vagaira, which is really that how women are negotiating kinship and marriage ties to create a support group of people who will share with each other information, technology, capital, information about the markets, and so on. And I think this kind of links into the technology discussion because, it is really in the absence of kind of state support or other kind of support, it is really this social capital and the social networks that is the primary source of technology sharing, information sharing, capital sharing. And women are very key in bringing this together in terms of resolving conflict resolution, in terms of negotiations. Developing marriage ties was very, very important in terms of building this business and strengthening this business. And of course, in all this, women play a very critical, though again, totally invisible role.
It seems that women are just not going to the sea to catch fish. That's the only thing that they're not doing. Other than that, they're involved in practically everything. Now that we see that there are so many technological advancements, has the women's role in the industry been reshaped because of these technological advancements?
So, absolutely. So, I'll talk about Tamil Nadu in particular, where I have done most of my research, and also then a little bit later about Maharashtra. So, the Indian Ocean tsunami took place on December 26, 2004, and a lot of people died. There was a lot of destruction of property and so on. But what happened as a result of that is there was a lot of relief, a lot of money that came in, a lot of thinking on issues of safety, and also technology came in a big way. So, there was a rapid expansion, a lot of donors and others giving boats, giving gears, so like mobile phones for GPS locations, for information and weather forecasting. Many apps were developed and so on. So there was a real push actually to improve technology from 2004 onwards. What we must realize is that also with climate change and with these extreme events, there are also changes that take place in the sea in terms of the currents, the temperature, water temperature, and therefore the fish movement also changes. So what has happened from approximately that time is that a fish called oil sardine, which is a big export fish, also very, it used to be in Kerala, it used to be on the west coast of India. This shifted to the Tamil Nadu, east coast of India. And these come in large shoals. And there was a technology in Kerala which had earlier been developed called the ring seine, which is basically multiple boats and they very large net create a ring around the shoal of fish. And then the net is put and this whole shoal is caught. So this technology then came to the Tamil Nadu coast on the east coast as well. But of course, it needed this very big investment in this large net, and it also needed a large boat to carry that net, but it also then needed a fleet of smaller boats which the small scale fishers already had, which could form the ring or which could form the circle around this shoal of fish and then carry back. They became the carrier boats. So what the small scale fishers found that this needs like 1 to 2 crores of rupees to manage this ring scene. So earlier the fishermen were managing with 1 to 5 lakhs capital, but now these ring scene and these new technologies, all this needed also much more of capital investment, costing about 1 to 2 crores. The social innovation that took place was that a lot of the men, the small scale fishers, they actually came together into something like informal cooperatives or groups where each of them contributed 3 to 5 lakhs, and if 20 came together or 30 came together, then they could have 1 or 1.5 crores, which could help them to invest in this ring scene technology. Now, as soon as the fish lands, the women kind of take over. So we found now that larger amounts of fish, especially this oil sardine landing, because the boats were larger, often it came also to the harbor rather than the beach from where these small scale fishers earlier used to operate. And also much of this was exported to Kerala mainly first, from Tamil Nadu, and then later abroad. So this created many both opportunities and difficulties for women. As I said, they are a diverse group, so there were winners and losers. So older women we found with experience in the trade, good social networks, and also who had worked for 20, 30 years as traders and vendors and had some accumulated savings and capital, they were able to come together to play the role of auctioneers. So what I mean by an auctioneer here is someone who performs the role of a financier. So the auctioneer is also giving an advance to the boat, sometimes of 20 to 30 lakhs. So auctioneer is taking a good proportion of the capital investment in this ring scene, and then becomes like a commission agent, so getting 10% or commission on all the sales made, and also had some other responsibilities like paying bonuses to the boat and crew. The auctioneer is an investor as well, clearly also needs to absorb the risks for any loss of nets, gear, at sea. I think most of this was money that was raised by women through informal and private sources because they don't get bank loans. So, as one of the auctioneers I worked with, Valli, she said that this is a risky job and we face both successes and failures because fishing is like that. Sometimes you get a catch, sometimes you don't get a catch. And self confidence is the real investment in this job. Like the men had formed groups, some of these women also formed groups, like two or three women, five women working together, pooling their resources in order to give advances to boats. And in order to reduce their risks, sometimes they invested in two or three kind of boats. So the group then also helped women because sometimes these boat landings are very early in the morning, like at 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock. And if two boats arrive at the same time, then one woman can't be in two different places. It also helped them to divide the labor amongst themselves. I mean, as a result of this risk taking, this confidence, actually from about 2910, when ring scene really took off, till February 2021, when it was banned by the government, this technology, which had huge implications. Actually, you see these women's households, it really improved. They were able to invest in their children's education, send them to private schools, build houses. One of them, whom I have in the video, which is on the Pari website, she actually said that she had aspirations for her son. One of the sons she sent to Delhi to take coaching classes for IAS exams because, they really wanted to move upwards and she had the money and she felt she could do this. But when the ban came in 2021, they actually lost a lot of this money and she had to withdraw this son and he came back. So she was very disappointed. Of course, some women did lose out as well, especially the younger women, because as I said, when the shift of this boat landing from the beach, that is in the village beach, to the harbor, a lot of younger women, especially who had children and so on, they got constrained in terms of their time, in terms of their mobility, in terms of also having money and transportation. So some women, of course, lost employment. I think what we found in this whole thing is that there was so much response with more fish coming in. I think this waste fish, the drying of fish, the value addition. So there was a lot of opportunity, but really there was no response from the state or the policy. As I said, there's no credit, first of all, to women. There was no training in terms of value addition. There was no facilities in terms of space for fish drying or anything, for career development, for skilling. Whatever women managed to do, I think during that decade, I think we could have really made a push for advancement of women also and for technology to women. But that parallel support, I think, didn't happen. It is starting to happen now, but it didn't happen at that time. And whatever women did was totally with their own initiative.
So, when you said that auctioneers are women, if we look at all the auctioneers, are they mostly women, or do we also like we have men, but we also have women auctioneers?
So I think it's mostly women, but of course it's very context specific. So this I'm talking about Kadalur in Tamil Nadu. When you go to bigger cities like Chennai, which are ports or harbors, or you go to Kerala, then you have men. So it depends also on the type of fisheries that these roles get divided. So women have been financiers in many things. In fishing community, actually, they say that women manage all the money because the men are out at sea. And I have seen even earlier, totally non-literate women, but their numeracy skills are so good. Just mental maths, large amounts of money, right? Every day they are like dealing with 50,000, 1 lakh money totally in cash and totally in their heads. And so paying of the labor, buying salt, paying for the transportation, buying the gunny bags. So there's a lot of management and a lot of entrepreneurship that they're engaged with. And I think the root cause is really the point that I raised about recognition or the invisibility, because we don't recognize all the activities involved in women's work in fisheries. What are the specific needs and challenges that each role requires? So we don't really prepare them or give them the tools or the skills to deal with that. So, for example, a shift from local to export markets, and as I said, beach landing of boats to harbors and large trading centers. Now, lack of transportation is a very important issue because now they can't walk. from the beach to the street or whatever it is. They need transportation and nobody has thought about it. But Seva, long time back in Kerala, I think they had started an initiative to actually to advocate with the government for buses for fisherwomen to come from the harbor or where the fish market to the city where they could sell, because these women, because of the smell of fish, they were not allowed to get into public transport. And that is also one of the films that actually women's profits were totally wiped out because there was no transportation and they had to hire private vans to go to the markets, and these could charge whatever they wanted because these women were desperate. So actually a big part of their profit got lost with transportation. Similarly, how do you manage credit and capital so you're able to buy in bulk and not indebted to private traders or private middlemen? So I think there are huge issues in terms of lack of space, which requires other services, women friendly technologies like hygienic fish drying facility, for instance, which can also lead to food safety. The lack of access, I would say, to some of the basics, infrastructure, capital, everything is privately sourced. There's no insurance to cover their risks. They often have low level of education as well, which can be a barrier. Not having access to technology, that has also kind of made women unwilling to participate in the fisheries sector.
As you mentioned about Seva, are there other non government institutes which help these women?
I think there's been some mobilization, some organization of women, particularly around markets and market space, market facilities. The only kind of policy which is there is actually ice boxes for women vendors, which comes in the government policy. So I think their NGOs have been successful. So the unionization, the mobilization around markets, not so much around technology. I think there have been NGOs, many more NGOs working with inland fisheries, sort of in ponds and aquaculture. Makam or others who've been working with women farmers. In many rural areas, you also have a village pond. And many of these NGOs have also organized women to kind of put some fish or to have an additional income generation activity through the village ponds and through aquaculture. Now, Odisha is an interesting state because under the state livelihoods mission, actually they have given ponds to women's SHGs for fishery activity. But in other states, it has not been so easy. I recently heard at a Makam meeting somebody from Maharashtra's Gondia district, Sarita Tai, she was saying that they formed a cooperative and took over a neglected pond, which they cleaned of weeds. They put in local fish. However, they didn't get the lease rights from the local government, and this created lots of problems. So there's a lot of resistance also from traditional fisher communities, from men in communities, from panchayats. There's a lack, as I said, in general, of a supportive policy framework.
Yeah, so how can technology be reimagined to support rather than exclude women from these spaces?
Like fisheries technologies have mainly considered production of fishing, and they are trying to maximize yields and efficiency of capture fisheries. And to support this and also export promotion, as I mentioned, which is a major goal of the industry and of government policy, there have been a move towards large infrastructure, ports, harbors, and generally more capital intensive and also modern fisheries. There is a central government incentive scheme of 50% subsidy to fishers interested in deep sea fishing. But the take up has been very low in Tamil Nadu because even with 50% subsidy, as I was mentioning earlier, these deep sea the equipment would cost like more than a crore. For small scale fishers, it has been beyond their means, even with a 50% government subsidy. But the export orientation has meant also setting up factories, for cleaning and preparing the fish, prawns for export, and so on in the private sector, and not really any investment in post harvest processing and value addition for the domestic sector. And this is where, of course, women are working in these factories as factory workers, but this is very different from really investing in technology, making it more inclusive for a large number of women in the fisheries sector. As I mentioned, the policy only suggests ice box for women fish vendors, head loading or selling in the street. But what about the others? So I think there's a real question about technological inclusion here, that women are also like men, small scale operators. So we do need small scale technologies. I think the way ahead is really managing these technologies through collectives of women. So I want to give the example of a women's collective in Tamil Nadu, supported by the MS Swaminathan Research Foundation. During the COVID time, this collective really realized that transportation was a big problem for women. So they invested in an auto van for helping women members transport their produce to the market. But the other more recent thing that has happened is that access to solar dryers and other equipment for value addition, for making pickles, powders, etc. And the MS Swaminathan Research Foundation has really helped this with the backward and forward linkages, that these women then have to have capital to purchase adequate fish, which they can then dry, and also connections to the market. And this is where I think they have recently started using, in the last 2 years, digital tools for engaging with both buyers and markets. There are many challenges which these women faced and which the collective faced. One is, of course, the digital divide, that not many women have access to smartphones and digital platforms and so on. There's also problems with getting women together in the collective, because these fisherwomen, many of them have to go to the market. They're busy every day, and sometimes they leave, as I said, at 4 a.m. and come back only by 5 p.m. So how do you mobilize them into the collective? Also, how do you mobilize them in terms of capacity building, training in digital technologies? So three kinds of things I think MSSRF decided to do. First was training and capacity building in digital as well as financial literacy, and also post harvest technologies like solar facilities, and how do you use it, how do you maintain it, and so on. Very important was access to these post harvest technologies. So the first solar dryer, actually what was available was a very large one, which was like 1 ton or 2 tons. And of course, this, like, a single woman can't do it. Like, she's dealing with 50 kilos, 100 kilos. So you really need a collective to be able to invest in that kind of money. But more recently, they have managed to work with private sector people producing these solar dryers, to actually bring them down to much smaller units, much smaller boxes of solar dryers, which individual women can also use. So I think negotiating with producers to produce this kind of technology at the level at which women can work with it is very important. And then, as I said, forward and backward linkages for access to these equipments, but also to credit and to markets. So right now, I think over the last 1 or 2 years, the women are able to produce quite high quality value added products. This helps them to earn better incomes, but it also has enabled them to balance some of their domestic work, which they still need to do. One important issue is that women in the fisheries sector, the kind of work that they do, a big issue has been occupational health. So, being in the sun for a long time, or standing in the water to collect seaweed, or cleaning, with ice, working with ice, or head loading, using salt for drying fish. So all these lead to a lot of occupational health problems. And this is one sector where there has been very little attention in terms of occupational health. So there is nothing in terms of the government system to deal with occupational health. So I think having access to this technology, one of the big changes that I can see, very quickly, even within a couple of years, because they're working with better technologies, they don't have to stand in the sun that much, they are able to earn better incomes. There is some kind of positive impact on their health. Having said that, I think occupational health, I still need to flag as a big issue. So I think what I want to emphasize here, that how do you make technologies more inclusive? And this I have seen again and again, even in the agricultural or the farming context, and also with the women working in fisheries, that even if they are not highly literate, but actually they know their job, right? They know the work. They can recognize the fish, the quality. They know what needs to be done. But what is important here is that, some kind of training and capacity building, skill development. There is no training facility available for women's tasks in fisheries. All the technical training institutes that we have in India are linked to boats for men and for capture fisheries. So women learn all their skills informally from their mothers, aunts, other female relatives. And here, I think what the MSSRF experience shows is that we really need to be attentive to tailoring this training to women of different capacities and levels. So if you have women who are non-literate and younger women who are educated, then how do you create the training program? Non-literate women would like more visuals, they would like more oral, they would like, even through digital, like more voice response kind of mobile technologies. Whereas those who are more educated don't mind having an app, or audio visual or other kinds of things which they can understand by themselves. Peer learning here is very important, especially for women who are neoliterate or non-literate. If they can learn from other women and who have done this, and this is also linked to the informal learning traditionally, that women have always been helping each other. So now, if we can train some women with more skills and then get them to also support others and help them with this learning journey, I think that's a very important. Age factor is very important. Poverty and socio-economic position. A lot of women just have old phones, the touch phones, and not the smartphones, because also of a practical reason. They feel they are dealing with water, they're dealing with fish, and the touch phone won't really work. Whereas with pressing, even if their hands are a little wet, it's fine. So I think there are issues of digital divide for us to focus our training and capacity building accordingly. The second issue, which is very important to make technology inclusive, which I have hinted at, is the scale of technologies. So I mentioned now that MSSRF has been supporting these women and also working with producers of solar to have individual solar units for drying fish. We need the best technology, but we need it at the scale at which women work in order to make it more inclusive. And the third, I think, related issue is really around credit. So even if technologies are appropriate or at the right scale, banks don't provide fisher women with capital. So this goes back to the issue I raised it right at the beginning about recognition, that if we need to recognize these fisher women as workers, and then we need to make sure that banks will give them credit for investing in appropriate technologies. I think they are willing to do it, but there is a lot of the loose ends, the backward and forward linkages, that needs to be tied up. In fact, it was only in 2024, that is just last year, some months back, that actually the registration of fisher women has been introduced. Women didn't have identity, and all the compensation, everything for boats or for, when there are sea accidents, whatever, it went to the men. That's what these auctioneers kept saying. Many of these women kept saying, if they lose fish, it rots, they don't get ice. There is no insurance or compensation because it's not recognized. So I think it was only in 2020 that a system of registration has been introduced. And I think it was also mentioned during this that something like a Kisan credit card can also be extended to the fisher community, which didn't have. So both men and women. But how far and how soon it will apply to women is not yet clear, because so far it has not even worked with men. So I think we'll have to see that when it will apply to women, how it will apply, and so on. To make technology more inclusive, I think we need to recognize that just technology alone is not enough. You need the backward and the forward linkages that can help maintain that technology. This is very critical.
So, like you said, that women were not even registered as fisher women. Have they like changed the definition of fisherman or fisher person to include women? Because as you mentioned, they still don't go to water, and they are not physically going and fishing, but they are there all around. So have they changed the definition? What changed?
Yeah, so I think this has been the larger advocacy, national policy of farmers, which came out of the report of the National Commission for Farmers in 2007. It took a very wide FAO definition to include anybody who's engaging with agriculture or allied activities. This could include fisheries, forest produce collection, beekeeping, home gardening, piggeries, goat rearing, animal husbandry. But unfortunately, from a policy level, it has not really come into implementation. So, for instance, the bank, the National Bank for Agriculture and Rural Development, NEBARD, NEBARD didn't shift its definition from land ownership to other this broader definition. So, I think there is a lot of like steps between having a policy and the all the nitty gritty things that need to be in place in order for that policy to be implemented. Technically, now for fisheries also, it is possible, but there will be a bureaucratic procedure to go through to register. I think for men, they're already registered because of the boats. So the boats have to be registered with the government, just like land is registered. So the men are in a way registered, but I think the women will have to go through this process. And again, I think we will have to think of this kind of facilitation to enable them. Because I think if they can get an equivalent of Kisan credit card, then that will be definitely one linkage. But as I said, there are multiple linkages to make technology really productive and really empowering.
So, Nitya, I was wondering, like, how do women auctioneers, are there any informal financial networks through which they work? And how do they sustain their businesses per se?
So even if you have to buy, like fish, if you look at it, fish we buy in the market for 500, 600 rupees a kilo. Even if women buy it for half that price, if they have to get some profit, they at least invest about 10,000 or 15,000 per day. So they need working capital, right? This is not a cheap resource. And because of lack of access to working capital or credit from the banks, so women at whatever scale, auctioneers need large scale money, women fish vendors need small scale money, but it has entirely been through the informal sources. So in our paper, actually, we did look at the different kinds of informal sources, and this was really interesting because women really widen the kind of informal sources. So one is whatever personal savings or whatever it is they might have. The other is joining a chit funds where they put in money, let's say 100 rupees or 1000 rupees, a group of 10 or 20, and then every meeting or every month one person gets the chit, so they get the bulk amount. So this is really to finance your bulk expenses. 1000 rupees is no help for me, but if I can get 10,000 rupees in bulk, then that's much more helpful. Their chance comes, they can get that 20,000 or 15,000 or 10,000, which is becomes like a working capital for them. A personal savings, of course, is very important, but they can't do without borrowing. So I think indebtedness is part of the life of these women workers. So one cheaper way of taking loans is if you take from your family and friends. So you say that, okay, I'll take some money today, I'll return it to you. So they may not charge interest. But this is again smaller amounts. For the larger amounts, they end up going to the private money lenders. The whole microcredit movement, which started with women's credits and women's groups, has now got converted in Tamil Nadu into private. It's called microfinance, but it's private microfinance, which is like a money lender, which charges quite high rates of interest, like 24%, maybe less than a money lender, but still it's like 24 to 36% interest per year. Often they have to give a collateral. In South India, when women get married, they have the Mangal Sutra, what we call as tali, which is usually made out of gold. So then often they give away their Mangal Sutra as a deposit. The other thing which I mentioned was gold loan. So if they want a loan from the bank, which is something called gold loan, which they can get at cheaper rates of interest, but then they have to put some gold there. So that's where they end up keeping their Mangal Sutra to get gold loan from banks. So I think there are multiple sources. So women try to diversify because gave earlier a quote that they see that this is really a risky business, and the most important thing is their self confidence. But I would add to that, their social relationships are so important. So I think they really have a large network and they try to keep multiple sources of informal finance, not depending on only one source of finance. There has been a cash economy where bank transactions have not been central, partly because they don't have the recognition or the visibility with the banks. To maintain a lot of these social networks, I think mobile phones has been very useful for women as a simple phone of trying to be in touch and maintain all these social networks and so on, but not really in terms of mobile banking. I mean, they have used mobile phone to talk to boat owners, customers, various kinds of things, but not really for mobile banking. Some of the women have started using a UPI, but there's is primarily a cash economy even now. And I wanted to narrate just a small anecdote which came from one of the women when she was telling about the UPI, that when she made a sale, and then obviously the person purchasing, usually a men, got her telephone number, right, because of UPI, and then started calling and harassing. And it became very difficult that even her husband would feel that, who's this man who's calling her and she's receiving calls. It led to domestic violence. It led to a lot of problems. So this is also a reason that actually she said we don't like UPI because then they get hold of our numbers. And it is a problem of violence and sexual harassment which all working women confront. But I think amongst us fisheries, because these women are out from home all day from 4 a.m. to 4 p.m. or 5 p.m., they are much more prone. Men think that she's roaming around, in the streets and all that. So it's fine. to harass or to call at any time and so on. So actually now many of these women don't prefer using UPI but prefer to deal in a cash economy. So here one more thing I should say with the collective formed by MSSRF, the cooperative, that they have now been using a lot of social media and digital tools, because also they're a cooperative, they're dealing with larger money, they have a bank account, and also they're dealing with markets and with producers. This is interesting that these women said that they are using the group account. They're not using their personal phones to deal with all these customers, producers, different kind of stakeholders. And this has given them a degree of protection from sexual harassment, which individual women, if they share their mobile numbers, then get into a problem. So I think having this group and sort of using the digital tools and the financial inclusion tools, digitalization through the group, including social media account, has really strengthened the ability of the collective to engage with buyers and expand their markets, like having a website, having other kinds of accounts, being on the digital media and using digital tools. And this is where I strongly think that some kind of collective identity is really important. Digital tools have so much helped men with their fishery activity. It has made it safer, it has reduced the time they are away at sea, because they can more clearly identify where to go. They know when to go, not to go. And I think similarly there is so much potential for digital tools to also be made relevant, accessible, and user friendly for women from different socio-economic backgrounds. How we share the information, like market information, price information. If some of this was available to the women, it would reduce the drudgery of their work, it would increase the incomes, give them a decent income, give them a decent quality of life, and really improve their status of their work. So as I said, MS Swaminathan Research Foundation now is running a project on the digital empowerment of women, really waiting to see what are the lessons that we can learn from something like this. As far as I know, this is the first project with Fisherwomen working on their digital empowerment.
Do you think technology based learning tools can help bridging the gap for women, or something else that can come here which can help either getting more women in the school or getting their kind of vocation recognized? Like what can be done here?
There are a couple of things that I wanted to say on this. Education more broadly, it carries multiple meanings, from functional skills to make a living. Like all of us go into areas, we equip ourselves depending on what professions we want to do, what our aspirations are. Skills can be used to expand social networks. And for poor people, also to change social status. Like if you are educated, then, that gives you expands your choices. And a younger generation is more educated, definitely, which is good because of our schooling, universal education programs. And they also therefore want to engage with labor that is, say, seen as more dignified and not manual work. And for girls and women, of course, this also often involves drudgery, like working in the hot sun. So even fish vending, I must say, is now limited to the poorest women, those who don't have options. And especially with ring scene and other things in Tamil Nadu, which increase the incomes, the men say that we don't want our wives to be doing such hard work. So the skilling pathway has really worked for men in fisheries. Apart from schools, there are also formal degrees and courses they can undertake, which can give them additional qualifications. So in Maharashtra, there's also this something called training certificate, that this is essential for boys or men in order to get subsidies on boats and gear. In Kadalur, I found young men who have been educated in even in engineering degrees and so on. They went abroad, they migrated for work to Singapore, Malaysia, where mostly they were working as construction labor or manual workers. And then after the tsunami and more recently, they have actually been coming back to fisheries. So we find in Tamil Nadu coast a lot of men who are educated with engineering degrees, no, highly educated. They have gone back to their fisheries. And one of the reasons is that the dignity of fishing. As I said, it has all these devices. It has your GPS, it has safety, it has training. They don't have to spend the whole day sitting on the boat. They have the devices, they can see which way the current is going, where are the shoals of fish. They can go straight there, they can do their fishing, and they can come back home in some hours. They get good income, they have control over their life, they have flexibility. And even though it's manual work, I think it's very much more dignified, it's very much more creating a work life balance as far as men are concerned. So it's not the same for women, because women haven't had the same kind of technological inputs, the same kind of dignity, the same kind of recognition, and therefore women don't want to come into fisheries. So a lot of the young women, when they're educated, they go for other kinds of jobs. They may go for government jobs, they may go for clerical jobs, they may go for even working in shops and malls and that kind of jobs. But they don't want to go for this kind of fisheries job, which is still seen as lacking in dignity. So I think this is a very interesting case. Through technology and through digitalization, we have been able to make fisheries a dignified employment for men. We have not been able to do the same for women. That is the challenge and that is the scope, because, definitely if fisheries is made dignified, these women would also prefer to work in fisheries. It can give much more income than working as a sales girl in some mall with no benefits, with nothing. To give an example from the Maharashtra case, where we studied the fisheries school, actually the cooperative movement was very strong. So, right from the 50s, that fisheries cooperatives were organized, again with mostly men as cooperative members, because they were seen as the fishermen. So Maharashtra government also did an interesting thing of setting up, we have studied and called as a fisheries school in this village. It was a village Satpati in Palghar district, which is basically a large fishing community of 30,000 fisher people belonging to the Koli or the fishing caste, Koli community. They actually did a very interesting thing to mix traditional skills with modern skills. So in this fisheries school, apart from the regular subjects, there was also a fisheries subject for which they brought in some of the local fishermen to also teach, how do you go out in the sea, how do you understand the waves, how do you repair a boat, how do you deal with crisis. So a lot of the practical skills, and they also had practicals on this, but they also did a lot of theory on, how do you maintain an engine, mechanical, carpentry, this kind of thing. So all this was basically targeting again the fishermen and the boats and the gear and going out to sea. I earlier mentioned the training certificate. So actually, it was out of this kind of movement that even if these boys dropped out of school, let's say after fifth class or eighth class, they could do another 6 months they in the local area, picking up some of these theory skills and some of these practical skills. They could get a training certificate that would then entitle them to, being a cooperative member, getting subsidy on boat, on gear, and this kind of thing. But some of the women I interviewed who are now union leaders and so on in Maharashtra, fisherwomen leaders, they are involved in the cooperatives. They said that even at that time, while the boys were taught skills about boats, carpentry, engine maintenance, mechanics, and they had practicals, but the girls actually, during this time when the men were doing practicals, the girls were pushed into domestic science, like stitching, cooking, this kind of skills. There were no trade related skills. So interesting that even though it's a whole Koli village and all of the women are also in fish drying, fish processing, fish marketing, but the girls in the school were not taught anything trade related. They were not given skills on accounting, on market access, use of technologies, digital schools, tools, nothing. Whatever they learned was informally from their mothers and other female relatives. And actually, some of them who spoke to us at that time, who are now older, much older, and they are very active in the movement, they actually resented that, why was it that we were not given technical training? We also came from these same fishing households, and our mothers and, were also involved with the fishery activity. So I think this focus on capture fisheries and this invisibility of post harvest work, it has been historical, right from the 50s and the 60s, and it runs very deep. So, curriculum committee, for instance, those women told me in Maharashtra who are leaders of the union, and also some of the teachers and some of the older men who were involved with this fisheries school, they said that curriculum needs to be relevant. So this I mentioned earlier, even in terms of MSSRF, a digitalization project, that you have to make it relevant, you have to make it accessible, you have to make it user friendly. And I think these are basically educational principles. But when we are working with poor people, especially poor women, everything is standardized. We don't really think that there are also people with specific needs, with specific aspirations, with specific experiences, with specific skills, and we need to tailor program to meet their own needs and priorities.
Still can't get over the fact that, I mean, we don't have a formal way of getting skills for women.
Yeah,
Uh,
I mean, even business skills, no? If you say
right,
like
right.
management skills, I mean, they're how to keep records, how to keep accounting skills, no? That these are, if women are doing marketing, we go to an IIM or a management institute to pick up those skills. This would be excellent to give women some skills in sort of, the marketing, the understanding the market. How do you advertise, how do you market, how do you keep records, how do you manage labor, like a mini management course. These women would do wonderful jobs.
Right now, they're just depending on hereditary skills, whatever they can get. So, what policy intervention could ensure that women are not just supporting the industry but leading its transformation?
I just wanted to put it also into context that we did a systematic literature review of the impact of post harvest practices and technologies on gender equality. And this is very key now. There's more recognition with climate change and so on, that a lot of the produce is lost due to post harvest loss. So, actually, there is a lot of technological interventions now to reducing global aquatic post harvest loss. But at the same time, there is very little attention to the lives of these workers. More than half of them are women. So, most of the technological emphasis on post harvest has been to improve efficiency, to improve quality, very technical, and not really looking at the lives of these workers. So we found that wherever technology interventions have been taken place, whether it is traditional technologies or improved technologies, there is, as I said, improved technologies often mean like going to factories and factory based with everything very safe, with gloves for women. In India also we have seen in prawn peeling factories and so on, and globally. But of course, this means that these women are really reduced to workers. Their contracts are precarious due to pre existing social inequalities. They're at the bottom rung of workers in these factories. They don't have any control over the fisheries or the produce or what the factory is doing anymore. In traditional contexts, women have more control, they have more flexibility. But here, as I said earlier, the constraints are that they don't have any support in terms of improving technology. They also perform all the domestic and care work the minute it is home based. So this can restrict their agency. I will reiterate some of the issues that I have been talking about. First, despite lot of call for actions from people working on gender and development and women's work, that we need gender specific data, we need to understand what women are doing in this sector and then respond to that. We need to understand gendered specialization. What we have in terms of data and so on is very, very limited, virtually non-existent. For me itself, it was a learning. I hadn't realized that there were so many different activities within fishery sector which women are engaged in. So I think the first step is data, and more so, I think in gender we talk about intersectionality, that not all women are the same. Even within the fisheries, as I've described, there's poorer women, there's richer women, there's women with more family support, there is widows, there's very desperate women, there's young people, educated women, there's elderly, there's migrant workers. So these kinds of groups are hardly discussed or hardly visible in the literature. Even when you look at the fisheries census data coming from the Center for Marine Fisheries Research in Kochi, at most they will disaggregate male and female. So there is no further disaggregation in terms of what exactly are the types of work that women are doing. And I think one important step for policy to start responding and giving women a central space is the really recognition and understanding of what is it that women are doing in the sector. I think the second one is about the scale and the nature of technology, which are important drivers of outcomes. So large scale factory settings, women are at the lower end of the workforce, etc., with very little decision making. But in small scale processing also, they can be devalued and there's no support in terms of skills and resources. I think we need to recognize and highlight the important nuances and contradictions in both the technology itself and the process involved embedded within these technologies. I think if women are to lead in transformation, we need to really think about broader outcomes, especially in terms of health and livelihoods. So far, the focus of technology has been on technical efficiency, functional efficiency, productivity, and not on the lives and livelihoods of people, especially differently positioned women involved in the process. We need to think about occupational health. It is not discussed at all. What about minimum income? Because this is self employed, they are not getting wages except in factories. But nobody is thinking about what are their aspirations, what is decent work, what are the minimum incomes that they should be earning for livelihood security, what are their aspirations in terms of dignity, in terms of recognition of labor, in terms of the types of labor that need to be put at the center when thinking about women's leadership in technology transformation. Finally, it comes to decision making and representation. We talk about representation justice, political participation, decision making, and I think within technological change is one area where women are totally excluded from decision making. I gave earlier an example of a curriculum development for the fisheries school. But whether you have curriculum development, whether you have technology development, I gave also the example of these big technologies. It's not in line with women's aspirations or what they want. The kind of work that they want to do. So I think that having women in decision making, taking their guidance on what kind of technologies to use, what tools, sexual harassment with digital tools, UPI, this is not something which we had thought about. So keeping women within this decision making in terms of how to use technology, how to use digital tools is really very important if we are to minimize the negative effects and maximize the emancipatory potentials of technology and truly make it inclusive of women.
Amazing. If there is one key message that you'd like to give policymakers, researchers, and listeners to take away on enabling tech and digitalization process for women in fisheries, what will that be?
We really need to embrace an entire aquatic food system or an aquatic system approach when planning policies, because these are interconnected. Just like farming, harvesting, marketing, I think with the farm laws and so on, all of this came into the limelight. It's the same with fisheries. These are interconnected, except that there is a big gender divide, that the fishing part is done by men and all the post harvest is done by women. So I think we really need to take a food system approach, an aquatic system approach, where we look at capture fisheries, aquaculture, post harvest, processing, storage, consumption. And this shift in thinking, in conceptualization, really needs to be reflected whether it is in research or whether it is in investment across the system. So we need research also, which is more rigorous and comparative and looks at the impacts of different technologies and different groups of people, men, women, young and elderly, migrant, non migrant, and takes account of intersectionality in that sense. If we recognize the whole system as a whole, then I think the big policy or research message or implication is that we also need to bring all these diverse voices across the system, onto the table, especially women's voices, whether it is in policy discussions, whether it is in investment discussions, whether it is in research priorities around, post harvest, local, at different scales, in order to make this process inclusive, give the proper recognition to women work in the fisheries sector.
That's wrap up our amazing discussion with Professor Nitya Rao. Thank you for telling us so much about women in fisheries sector. And I think most of us learned a lot today. So let's work toward a future where women are not just in supporting but leading in the evolving industry. Thank you, Professor Nitya, for your valuable time and patience with which you explained everything today. Thank you to the audience for tuning in. Please like, share, subscribe.